This is the 14th of our online lessons on To Kill a Mockingbird. Today we'll work through chapters 22 and 23, immediately after the jury's guilty verdict. These lessons were created for the students of St. Patrick's CBC in Kimberley, South Africa, in preparation for their Grade 10 final examinations within the Independent Examinations Board system. As a school, we have made a conscious decision to share our good fortune with others. For this reason, the English department is sharing all lesson materials developed during the coronavirus pandemic with anyone else who can make use of them. If you find these online lessons on Mockingbird useful, please subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and share with friends and colleagues. We're all part of the same village. Make sure that you have your copy of the novel with you. Today we'll start from page 218 in the Heinemann Schools edition. As we work through these two chapters, please look out for references to these themes and topics. Firstly, from a plot development angle, you should be asking yourselves what happens to Tom Robinson after the jury's guilty verdict. Will he be put to death? How does the rest of Maycomb react to the outcome of the trial? Secondly, what do these two chapters have to tell us about the theme of justice? Thirdly, as we get to know Aunt Alexandra a little bit better, what do we see about her prejudices? Does she discriminate against people only on the basis of color? The word prejudice shows us that it's about prejudging people. Who and how does Aunt Alexandra prejudge? Finally, how are gender issues portrayed in these two chapters? Let's get to the reading. Chapter 22, page 218. It was Jem's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through the cheerful crowd. "It ain't right," he muttered. "It ain't right, Atticus." "No, son, it's not right." We walked home. Aunt Alexandra was waiting up. She was in her dressing gown, and I could have sworn she had on her corset underneath it. "I'm sorry, brother," she murmured. Having never heard her call Atticus brother before, I stole a glance at Jem, but he wasn't listening. He would look up at Atticus, then down at the floor, and I wondered if he thought Atticus somehow responsible for Tom Robinson's conviction. "Is he all right?" Auntie asked, indicating Jem. "He'll be so presently," said Atticus. "It was a little too strong for him. I'm going to bed. If I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me." Well, I didn't think it wise in the first place to let them. This is their home, sister. We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it. But they don't have to go to the courthouse and wallow in it. It's just as much Maycomb County as missionary teas. Atticus, you are the last person I thought would turn bitter over this. I'm not bitter, just tired. I'm going to bed. "Atticus," said Jem bleakly. "What, son?" "How could they do it? How could they?" "I don't know, but they did it. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again. And when they do it, it seems that only children weep. Good night." But things are always better in the morning. Atticus rose at his usual ungodly hour and was in the living room behind the Mobile register when we stumbled in. Jem's morning face posed the question his sleepy lips struggled to ask. "It's not time to worry yet," Atticus reassured him. "We're not through yet. There'll be an appeal, you can count on that." "Gracious alive, Cal, what's all this?" He was staring at his breakfast plate. Calpurnia said, "Well, Tom Robinson's daddy sent you along this chicken this morning. I fixed it." "Well, you tell him I'm proud to get it. Bet they don't have chicken for breakfast at the White House." "What are these?" "Rolls. Estelle down at the hotel sent them. "You'd better step out here and see what's in the kitchen, Mr. Finch." We followed him. The kitchen table was loaded with enough food to bury the family, hunks of salt pork, tomatoes, beans, even scuppernongs. Atticus grinned when he found a jar of pickled pig's knuckles. "Do you reckon Auntie will let me eat these in the dining room?" Calpurnia said, "This was all round the back steps when I got here this morning. They appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they?" Atticus's eyes filled with tears. He didn't speak for a moment. "Tell them I'm very grateful. Tell them they must never do this again. Times are too hard." The rest of that page tells us how the townsfolk, the white townsfolk, are full of gossip about the trial. Go down to the last 6 lines. Miss Maudie yelled for Jem Finch to come there. Jem groaned and heaved himself up from the swing. "We'll go with you," Dill said. Miss Stephanie's nose quivered with curiosity. She wanted to know who all gave us permission to go to court. She didn't see us, but it was all over town this morning that we were in the coloured balcony. Did Atticus put us up there as a sort of, wasn't it right close up there with all those? Did Scout understand all the, didn't it make us mad to see our daddy beat? "Hush, Stephanie." Miss Maudie's diction was deadly. "I've not got all the morning to pass on the porch. Jem Finch, I called to find out if you and your colleagues can eat some cake. Got up at 5 to make it, so you better say yes. Excuse us, Stephanie. Good morning, Mr. Avery." There was a big cake and 2 little ones on Miss Maudie's kitchen table. There should have been 3 little ones. It was not like Miss Maudie to forget Dill, and we must have shown it. But we understood when she cut from the big cake and gave the slice to Jem. As we ate, we sensed that this was Miss Maudie's way of saying that as far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. She sat quietly in a kitchen chair watching us. "Don't fret, Jem. Things are never as bad as they seem. I simply want to tell you that there are some men in this world who were born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father is one of them." "Oh, well, don't you oh well me, sir. You are not old enough to appreciate what I said." "It's like being a caterpillar in a cocoon. That's what it is," Jem said. "Like something asleep wrapped up in a warm place. I always thought Macomb folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what they seemed like. We're the safest folks in the world. We're so rarely called on to be Christians, but when we are, we've got men like Atticus to go for us. I wish the rest of the county thought that. Well, you'd be surprised how many of us do. Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Just who? Well, his coloured friends, for one thing. And people like us. People like Judge Taylor. People like Mr. Heck Tate. Stop eating and start thinking, Jem. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident? That Judge Taylor might have had his reasons for naming him? Well, this was a thought. Court-appointed defences were usually given to Maxwell Green, Macomb's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. Maxwell Green should have had Tom Robinson's case. Now you think about that, Miss Maudie was saying. It was no accident. I was sitting there on the porch last night, waiting. I waited and waited to see you all come down the sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought, Atticus Finch won't win. He can't win, but he is the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step. Skip a few lines. I think I'll be a clown when I get grown, said Dill. Yes, sir, a clown. There ain't one thing in this world I can do about folks except laugh, so I'm going to join the circus and laugh my head off. Oh, you got it backwards, Dill. Clowns are sad. It's folks that laugh at them. Well, I'm going to be a new kind of clown. I'm going to stand in the middle of the ring and laugh at the folks. Just look yonder. Every one of them ought to be riding broomsticks. Aunt Rachel already does. Miss Stephanie and Miss Rachel were waving wildly at us in a way that did not give the lie to Dill's observation. Oh gosh, breathed Jem. I reckon it would be ugly not to see them. Something was wrong. Mr. Avery was red in the face from his sneezing spell and nearly blew us off the sidewalk when we came up. Miss Stephanie was trembling with excitement, and Miss Rachel caught Dill's shoulder. You get on in the backyard and stay there. There's danger a-coming. What's the matter? Ain't you heard yet? It's all over town. At that moment, Aunt Alexandra came to the door and called us, but she was too late. It was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us. This morning, Mr. Bob Ewell stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took the rest of his life. And the novel will certainly take a sinister turn from here. Chapter 23, Atticus's response. I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco. According to Miss Stephanie Crawford, however, Atticus was leaving the post office when Mr. Ewell approached him, cursed him, spat on him, and threatened to kill him. Miss Stephanie said Atticus didn't bat an eye, just took out his handkerchief and wiped his face and stood there and let Mr. Ewell call him names wild horses could not bring her to repeat. Mr. Ewell was a veteran of an obscure war. That, plus Atticus's peaceful reaction, probably prompted him to inquire, "Too proud to fight, you black-loving bastard?" Miss Stephanie said Atticus said no, too old, put his hands in his pockets, and strolled on. Page 224. The children are understandably afraid. They ask Atticus to get a gun for protection, just below the halfway mark of page 224. Atticus asks his son, "What's bothering you?" "Mr. Ewell." "What's happened?" "Nothing's happened. We're scared for you, and we think you ought to do something about him." "Do what? Put him under a peace bond?" "Well, when a man says he's going to get you, it looks like he means it." "Oh, he meant it when he said it. Jem, see if you can stand in Bob Ewell's shoes a minute. I destroyed his last shred of credibility at that trial, if he had any to begin with. The man had to have some kind of comeback. His kind always does. So if spitting in my face and threatening me saved Myella Ewell one extra beating, well, that's something I'll gladly take. He had to take it out on somebody, and I'd rather it be me than that house full of children out there. You understand?" Jem nodded. I find that amazing, that Atticus lives by this dictum, put yourself in the shoes of another man, and he does it even with Bob Ewell. Aunt Alexandra entered the room as Atticus was saying, "We don't have anything to fear from Bob Ewell. He got it all out of his system that morning." "I wouldn't be so sure of that, Atticus. His kind would do anything to pay off a grudge. You know how those people are." "What on earth could Ewell do to me, sister?" "Something furtive. You may count on that." Oh, nobody has much chance to be furtive in Maycomb. And after that, we weren't afraid. Summer was melting away, and we made the most of it. Atticus assured us that nothing would happen to Tom Robinson until the higher court reviewed his case, and that Tom had a good chance of going free, or at least of having a new trial. He was put at Enfield Prison Farm, 70 miles away in Chester County. I asked Atticus if Tom's wife and children were allowed to visit him, but Atticus said no. If he loses his appeal, what'll happen to him? He'll go to the chair, unless the governor commutes his sentence. It's It's not time to worry yet, Scout. We've got a good chance. Jem looked up. It ain't right. He didn't kill anybody, even if he was guilty. He didn't take anybody's life. Yeah, but you know rape is a capital offense in Alabama. Yes, sir, but the jury didn't have to give him death. If they wanted to, they could have given him 20 years. Given. Tom Robinson is a coloured man, Jem. No jury in this part of the world is going to say, we think you guilty, but not very, on a charge like that. It was either a straight acquittal or nothing. I know it's not right, but I can't figure out what's wrong. Maybe rape shouldn't be a capital offence. Atticus dropped his newspaper beside his chair. He said he didn't have any quarrel with the rape statute, none whatever, but he did have deep misgivings when the state asked for and the jury gave a death penalty on purely circumstantial evidence. He glanced at me, saw I was listening, and made it easier. I mean, before a man is sentenced to death for murder, say, there should be 1 or 2 eyewitnesses. Someone should be able to say, yes, I was there and saw him pull the trigger. But lots of folks have been hanged on circumstantial evidence. I know, and lots of them probably deserved it too. But in the absence of eyewitnesses, there's always a doubt, sometimes only the shadow of a doubt. The law says reasonable doubt, but I think a defendant is entitled to the shadow of a doubt. There's always the possibility, no matter how improbable, that he's innocent. Well, then it all goes back to the jury then. We ought to do away with juries. Jem was adamant. Atticus tried hard not to smile, but couldn't help it. You're rather hard on us, son. I think maybe there might be a better way. Change the law. Change it so that only judges have the power of fixing the penalty in capital cases. Or then go up to Montgomery and change the law. You'd be surprised how hard that'd be. I won't live to see the law changed, and if you live to see it, you'll be an old man. This wasn't good enough for Jem. No, sir, they ought to do away with juries. He wasn't guilty in the first place, and they said he was. If you had been on that jury, son, and 11 other boys like you, Tom would be a free man. So far, nothing in your life has interfered with your reasoning process. Those are 12 reasonable men in everyday life, Tom's jury. But you saw something come between them and reason. You saw the same thing that night in front of the jail. When that crew went away, they didn't go as reasonable men. They went because we were there. There is something in our world that makes men lose their heads. They couldn't be fair if they tried. In our courts, when it's a white man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. They're ugly, but those are the facts of life. But it doesn't make it right. You can't convict a man on evidence like that. You can't. You couldn't, but they could and did. The older you grow, the more of it you'll see. The one place where a man ought to get a square deal is in a courtroom, be he any color of the rainbow. But people have a way of carrying their resentments right into a jury box. As you grow older, you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. But let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, no matter who he is, how rich he is, or how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash. Atticus was speaking so quietly, his last word crashed on our ears. I looked up, and his face was vehement. There's nothing more sickening to me than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of a Negro's ignorance. Don't fool yourselves. It's all adding up, and one of these days we're going to pay the bill for it. I hope it's not in you children's time. Atticus, Jem said, why don't people like us and Miss Maudie ever sit on juries? You never see anybody from Macomb on a jury. They all come from out in the woods. I was wondering when that would occur to you. Well, there are lots of reasons. For one thing, Miss Maudie can't serve on a jury because she's a woman. You mean women in Alabama can't? I do. I guess it's to protect our frail ladies from sordid cases like Tom's. Besides, I doubt if we'd ever get a complete case tried. The ladies would be interrupting to ask questions. Jem and I laughed. Miss Maudie on a jury would be impressive. I thought of old Mrs. Dubose in her wheelchair. Stop that rapping, John Taylor. I want to ask this man something. Perhaps our forefathers were wise. Atticus was saying, with people like us, that's our share of the bill. We generally get the juries we deserve. Our stout Macomb citizens aren't interested in the first place. In the second place, they're afraid. And then they're afraid? Why? Well, what if, say, Mr. Link Dearce had to decide the amount of damages to award, say, Miss Maudie when Miss Rachel ran her over with a car? Link wouldn't like the thought of losing either lady's business at his store, would he? So he tells Judge Taylor that he can't serve on the jury because he doesn't have anybody to keep store for him while he's gone. So Judge Taylor excuses him. Sometimes he excuses him wrathfully. What'd make him think either one of them would stop trading with him? Or Miss Rachel would, Miss Maudie wouldn't. But a jury's vote is secret, Atticus. You've many more miles to go, son. A jury's vote is supposed to be secret. Serving on a jury forces a man to make up his mind and declare himself about something. Men don't like to do that. Sometimes it's unpleasant. Well, Tom's jury sure made up its mind in a hurry. No, it didn't. That was the one thing that made me think, well, this may be the shadow of a beginning. That jury took a few hours. An inevitable verdict, maybe, but usually it takes him just a few minutes. This time, you might like to know that there was one fellow who took considerable wearing down. In the beginning, he was raring for an outright acquittal. Who? Oh, it's not for me to say. But I'll tell you this much, he was one of your old Sarum friends. One of the Cunninghams? I didn't recognize any of them. You're joking. Or one of their connections. On a hunch, I didn't strike him. Just on a hunch, could have, but I didn't. Golly Moses. One minute they're trying to kill him, and the next they're trying to turn him loose. I'll never understand those folks as long as I live. Next page. Atticus said he had a feeling, nothing more than a suspicion, that they left the jail that night with considerable respect for the Finches. Then, too, he said it took a thunderbolt plus another Cunningham to make one of them change his mind. If we'd had two of that crowd, we'd have had a hung jury. You mean you actually put on the jury a man who wanted to kill you the night before? How could you take such a risk, Atticus? How could you? Well, when you analyze it, there was little risk. There's no difference between one man who's going to convict and another man who's going to convict, is there? There's a faint difference between a man who's going to convict and a man who's a little disturbed in his mind, isn't there? He was the only uncertainty on the whole list. Skip 2 paragraphs. Aunt Alexandra was hooking a rug and not watching us, but she was listening. I remembered the distant, disastrous occasion when I rushed to young Walter Cunningham's defense. Now I was glad I had done it. Soon as school starts, I'm going to ask Walter home to dinner. I planned this, having forgotten my private resolve to beat him up the next time I saw him. He can stay over sometimes after school, too. Atticus could drive him back to Old Sarum. Maybe he could spend the night with us sometime. Okay, Jem? We'll see about that, Aunt Alexandra said. Well, why not, Auntie? They're good folks. Jean Louise? There is no doubt in my mind that they're good folks, but they are not our kind of folks. She means they're yappy, Scout. What's a yap? Oh, tacky. They like fiddling and things like that. Well, I do too. Don't be silly, Jean Louise. The thing is, you can scrub Walter Cunningham till he shines. You can put him in shoes and a new suit, but he'll never be like Jem. Besides, there's a drinking streak in that family a mile wide. Finch women aren't interested in that sort of people. Auntie, she ain't 9 yet. Well, she may as well learn it now. Aunt Alexandra had spoken. Well, if they're good folks, well, then why can't I be nice to Walter? I didn't say not to be nice to him. You should be friendly and polite to him. You should be gracious to everybody, dear. But you don't have to invite him home. Well, what if he was kin to us, Auntie? Well, the fact is that he's not kin to us, but if he were, my answer would be the same. Auntie, Atticus says you can choose your friends, but you sure can't choose your family, and they're still kin to you no matter whether you acknowledge them or not. And it makes you look right silly when you don't. Oh, that's your father all over again. And I still say that Jean Louise will not invite Walter Cunningham to this house. If he were her double first cousin once removed, he would still not be received in this house unless he comes to see Atticus on business. Now, that is that. She had said indeed not, but this time she would give her reasons. But I want to play with Walter, Auntie. Why can't I? I'll tell you why. Because he is trash. That's why you can't play with him. I'll not have you around him picking up his habits and learning Lord knows what. You're enough of a problem to your father as it is. I don't know what I would have done, but Jem stopped me. He caught me by the shoulders, put his arm around me, and led me sobbing in fury to his bedroom. Atticus heard us and poked his head around the door. It's all right, sir. It's not anything. And Atticus went away. The last line of the page. Scout, don't let Auntie aggravate you. It seemed only yesterday that he was telling me not to aggravate Auntie. You know, she's not used to girls, leastways not girls like you. She's trying to make you a lady. Can't you take up sewing or something? Hell no. She doesn't like me, that's all there is to it, and I don't care. It was her calling Walter Cunningham trash that got me going. Jem, not what she said about me being a problem to Atticus. We got that all straight one time. I asked him if I was a problem, and he said not much of one, at most one that he could always figure out, and not to worry my head a second about bothering him. No, it was Walter. That boy's not trash, Jem. He ain't like the Yules. You know something, Scott? I've got it all figured out now. I've thought about it a lot lately, and I've got it figured out. There's 4 kinds of folks in the world. There's the ordinary kind, like us and the neighbours. There's the kind like the Cunninghams out in the woods. The kind like the Yules down at the dump. And the black folk. Well, what about the Chinese and the Cajuns down yonder in Baldwin County? I mean in Macomb County. The thing about it is, our kind of folks don't like the Cunninghams. The Cunninghams don't like the Yules, and the Yules hate and despise the coloured folks. I told Jem if that was so, then why didn't Tom's jury, made up of folks like the Cunninghams, acquit Tom to spite the Yules? You know, I've seen Atticus pat his foot when there's fiddling on the radio, and he loves pot liquor better than any man I ever saw. Well, then that makes us like the Cunninghams. I can't see why... No, let me finish. It does, but we're still different somehow. Atticus said one time the reason Auntie is so hipped on the family is because all we've got is backgrounds and not a dime to our names. Well, Jem, I don't know. Atticus told me one time that most of this old family stuff is foolishness, because everybody's family is just as old as everybody else's. I said, did that include the coloured folks and Englishmen? And he said yes. Background doesn't mean old family. I think it's how long your family has been reading and writing. Scout, I've studied this real hard, and that's the only reason I can think of. Somewhere along when the Finches were in Egypt, one of them must have learned a hieroglyphic or two, and he taught this boy. Imagine Auntie being proud her great-granddaddy could read and write. Oh, ladies pick funny things to be proud of. Well, I'm glad he could. Or who'd have taught Atticus and them? And if Atticus couldn't read, you and me would be in a fix. I don't think that's what background is, Jem. Well then, how do you explain why the Cunninghams are different? Mr. Walter can hardly sign his name. I've seen him. We've just been reading and writing longer than they have. No, everybody's got to learn. Nobody's born knowing. That Walter, he's as smart as he can be. He just gets held back sometimes because he has to stay out and help his daddy. Nothing's wrong with him. No, Jem. I think there's just one kind of folks. Folks. Well, that's what I thought too when I was your age. If there's just one kind of folks, why can't they get along with each other? If they're all alike, why do they go out of their way to despise each other? Scout, I think I'm beginning to understand something. I think I'm beginning to understand why Boo Radley has stayed shut up in the house all this time. It's because he wants to stay inside. The gifts left for Atticus Finch are an important symbol, an acknowledgement of his efforts to have Tom Robinson acquitted. Miss Maudie plays an important role in the plot. As Scout is the narrator, she's too young to make sense of what is happening in Maycomb. By recounting Miss Maudie's analysis of events, we, the readers, are given an adult perspective of the outcome of the court case. Jem's childlike questions about the justice system are important. Justice should be childlike and uncomplicated. We are all equal as human beings. We should all be treated equally and, more importantly, we should treat others equally. Jem can see it, but the adults in his world have complicated what should be the simplicity of the judicial system. A courtroom should be the one place in the world which we enter without fear of prejudice and unfairness. It's important to remember that Aunt Alexandra is the sister of Atticus and Jack Finch. It does seem extraordinary that she thinks so differently to her brothers. Atticus has taught his children that all people are intrinsically the same. It's confusing to children when the adults in their world insist on such differing points of view, isn't it? The theme of gender, and in particular femininity, will be explored in more depth in chapter 24. For now, collate your notes on this theme so that you are prepared to add the last bits of information in the final chapters of the novel. I'd like you to answer these 5 questions in your notebooks. When you've completed them, send me a message and I'll email the model answers to you. That's it for today. I look forward to your joining me for the next lesson after Kill a Mockingbird. Until then, keep those masks on and keep your distance.